Hey y'all, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are when you see this video. Thank you so much for watching and joining me, Dorothea, through an Orthodox Christian lens. It is September 16th, 2025. In the headline on my title of this video, there's RF in there, and I guessed that to mean Russian Federation. In any case, after I'd read over this article that I will share with you in just a moment, I decided to do some research on the history of these two Orthodox churches prior to the 2014 coup and the 2022 invasion. So let's go to the first article. Patriarch Bartholomew to Trump. I granted Thomas to OCU as RF is Ukraine's enemy. The Patriarch of Constantinople explained to Trump why he granted the Thomas to the OCU. And this came out, I believe, today. During a meeting with Trump at the White House, Patriarch Bartholomew informed him about the reason for the Ecumenical Patriarchate's involvement in the Ukrainian church issue. The Patriarch reported this at a press conference following the meeting with the President of the USA. I thanked the President for his interest in the war in Ukraine and explained that our Patriarchate has a special interest in the situation in Ukraine, both political and ecclesiastical. According to him, he mentioned that we granted autocephaly about 6 years ago to the Church of Ukraine. They repeatedly requested this, we agreed, and it was fair for them to have this ecclesiastical independence from Moscow, which, as we all know, is an enemy of the Ukrainian people. Okay. We gave them the opportunity to live independently from the Moscow center, which oppressed them for decades. I remind you of the Holodomor, the genocide orchestrated by Stalin, which led to the death of millions, 3 to 4 million Ukrainians. Moscow is an enemy of Ukraine, and this enmity manifested in the war that began in February 2022, and unfortunately countries to this day with thousands of casualties on both sides, both Russia and Ukraine. I recently read that the casualties are estimated at 1 million people. Okay, first thing I want to say is that Russia was oppressing them. I certainly understand under the USSR there was oppression, for sure, of all the churches, including the Russian church. So the Ukrainian and Russian church was oppressed. People were living in the catacombs, and hundreds and thousands and millions of Orthodox died under these under the rule of the USSR. However, since the fall of the USSR, Soviet Union, I don't really know about this oppression because there was a lot of Western influence and interference, especially in how Boris Yeltsin was elected, and then what happened with the Ukrainian government, the coup in 2014. So I think there's a lot more just to say, oh, well, Moscow's oppressing. What about the West? I mean, you got to say that, right? I mean, we have this article from the UN, which I know they say these things. It's all talk. They do nothing. But the point is, UN accuses Ukraine of persecuting UOC clergy, communities, and journalists. 7 special rapporteurs have sent a letter to the authorities demanding an end to the persecution of clergy and believers. The Ukrainian authorities are obliged to respond within 60 days. So I think more recently, if we're talking about the past 20 years or less, things changed after the fall of the USSR. So it seems to me that the Patriarch just does not have a very high regard for the Russian government, and that's fine, or even the Russian Orthodox Church. I know that there's issues between the EP and the Patriarch Kirill, okay, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So I wanted to share that with you so you understood what was going on. with what he told the president today, apparently. I'm not sure why he's there. But maybe this is an old meeting. I don't know. Nope, there's Vance, so it must be new. In any case, they're there. So, probably because Archbishop L is there and he's talked to Trump several times. In any case, I'm going to read over this history for you. It's a little long, but it's really important to understand this because I didn't have all the details in this, and I should have, and I think it's important just so if we go further on into this dilemma, we have a better understanding of what took place in the past. Okay, so this is under Orthodox history. And so this person he put this out March 21st, 2022. So he says, even before the current war, the landscape of Orthodoxy in Ukraine was incredibly complicated, and any attempt to summarize it will inevitably fail to do the subject justice. This is compounded by the fact that it's nearly impossible to avoid bias. If I refer to the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OCU, as Metropolitan Epiphany, some will say that I am pro-OCU because I recognize him as a real metropolitan. Or if I put quotation marks around his name, Metropolitan Epiphany or Metropolitan Epiphany, the assumption will be that I am pro-Moscow and reject the canonicity of the OCU. If I use the spelling Kiev or Kyiv for Kiev, it's assumed to say something about my political leanings. For the sake of this summary, I'm going to refer to individuals by the titles that they claim for themselves without taking an open position on the legitimacy of those claims. And I'm going to use place names, e.g. Kiev, Kiev, that were commonly used in mainstream English language publications prior to recent events. So this is the most balanced piece I could find on this, and I also wanted it to be from an Orthodox perspective. At the beginning of 2018, 3 major groups existed in Ukraine claiming to be Orthodox. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church, an autonomous church under the Moscow Patriarchate, that's the UOC, led by Metropolitan Onufry Berezovsky. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate, KP, led by Patriarch Filaret Denisenko. The Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, UAOC, led by Metropolitan Makary Maletic. At that time, all of the world's Orthodox churches recognized only the UOC MP as canonical. The other 2 groups were considered schismatic. Both the KP and UAOC were created in the early 1990s in the context of the fall of the USSR and the independence of the Ukrainian state in 1991. At that time, the canonical Orthodox Church in Ukraine was known as the Ukrainian Exarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church under the Moscow Patriarchate. The Exarchate was headed by then Metropolitan Filaret Denisenko, who had been Metropolitan of Kiev since the 1960s. Filaret was a controversial figure, frequently thought to be a KGB collaborator, who aspired to become Patriarch of Moscow and who, in the early 1990s, was the subject of a scandalous expose. He had allegedly, pardon me, losing my voice again, he had allegedly lived with a woman for many years and fathered multiple children, despite his vow of celibacy. When the Patriarch of Moscow died in 1990, Filaret was appointed locum tenens and expected to be elected the next Patriarch, but he lost the election to Alexei II. After this, following the establishment of an independent Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian Exarchate, led by Filaret, requested autocephaly from the Moscow Patriarchate, but this was denied. Notably, the current leader of the UOC MP, Metropolitan Onufry, was one of the bishops who signed the request for autocephaly. Metropolitan Filaret was asked by the MP Holy Synod to resign as Metropolitan of Kiev. He initially agreed, but upon returning to Ukraine, he repudiated the resignation, stating that it had been done under pressure, and he was suspended and subsequently defrocked by the Moscow Patriarchate. While Filaret now alleges that this was in retaliation for his attempt at autocephaly, he was also charged with serious canonical offenses, i.e., alleged sexual activity. His deposition and defrocking were accepted by all of the Orthodox churches, including the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which explicitly acknowledged the MP's standing to do so. Filaret and a fellow bishop of the MP went into schism, creating their own jurisdiction, which called itself the Kiev Patriarchate. Although they were defrocked by the MP, these two bishops consecrated more bishops for the KP, creating a line of hierarchs tracing their apostolic succession back through the two former MP bishops. In 1997, the MP anathematized Filaret as an action that was accepted and recognized by the EP. The UAOC was created at basically the same time. There had been earlier groups in the 1920s and 1940s that also used the UAOC name, and the modern UAOC viewed itself as the inheritor of their mission. Portions of those earlier iterations of the UAOC migrated to America. And the first patriarch of the revived UAOC in Ukraine in the 1990s was Mstislav, who had received a canonically legitimate consecration in the 1940s and is an important figure in the history of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA. The major difference between the UAOC and the KP in recent decades has to do with apostolic succession. Most, or at least many, of the UAOC bishops appear to trace their lineage back to consecrators who themselves lacked any viable claim to apostolic succession. For example, the 2018 head of the UAOC, Metropolitan Makary, was consecrated by 3 bishops, that's in quotes, only one of whom had a canonically valid apostolic succession, i.e., consecration by at least 2 bishops who themselves had apostolic succession. The other 2 consecrators of Makary were self-ordained, i.e., non-bishops who simply dressed up as bishops. There's only one that seemed to be valid. As for the Ukrainian Exarchate, after denying its request for autocephaly, the MP granted it an extensive degree of autonomy, reorganizing it into the UOC MP of today. The UOC MP's autonomy is such that it is in some respects more independent than some autocephalous churches. It has its own Holy Synod, elects its own primate, who is confirmed by the MP, canonizes its own saints without MP approval, and operates its own Department of External Church Relations. The current leader of the UOC MP, Metropolitan Onufry, is universally respected throughout the Orthodox world as a man of integrity and even holiness. In 2014 and again in 2022, he has openly opposed Russian military aggression in Ukraine and defended the borders of the Ukrainian state, which to me would make just common sense. They're going to feel like that. It's notable that the Donbass region and the Crimea remain part of the UOC MP and have not been handed over to the MP proper. Isn't that interesting? So the Donbass and the Crimea still remain part of the UOC MP, but have not been handed over to the MP proper. That's important. In 2018, the Ecumenical Patriarch took 2 major steps. The EP rescinded a 17th century document that had granted jurisdiction over part of what is now Ukraine to the Moscow Patriarchate. The borders of this old territory are not identical with the territory of the modern Ukrainian state, but in any case, the EP's position was that it was taking back its old powers in Ukraine. Based on this rationale, all bishops in Ukraine were now EP bishops. Number 2, the EP declared that the hierarchs, clergy, and faithful of the KP and UAOC were hereby legitimized, no longer schismatics, and that their holy orders were recognized. Their bishops were bishops, their priests were priests, etc. The EP then organized a unification council in Kiev to bring together all of the Orthodox jurisdictions in Ukraine and form a new unified church. The hierarchs of all 3 jurisdictions were invited. Both the KP and UAOC attended in full force, but only 2 of the nearly 100 UOC MP bishops up to now, the only canonical bishops in Ukraine, came. Wow, only 2. One of the 2 UOC MP bishops who attended the council, was a controversial figure who had been accused of serious moral transgressions and was, by many accounts, looking for a way out. The Unification Council was chaired by Metropolitan Emmanuel, then of France, now Chalcedon, who represented the ecumenical patriarch and also included the active participation of then Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. The council elected as primate of the new church a young KP bishop named Epiphany Demenko, who was a protege of Patriarch Philaret, who himself was not recognized by the EP as a patriarch, but was given the title honorary patriarch by the new church. Soon after this, in January 2019, the Ecumenical Patriarchate issued a Thomas of Autocephaly to the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OCU. In connection with the creation of the OCU and the Thomas of Autocephaly, the EP signed an agreement with the Poroshenko government in Ukraine. Among other things, this agreement provided for the EP to take control of a major cathedral in Kiev, which would serve as a headquarters for an EP exarchate in Ukraine. This exarchate, led by an EP bishop, would not be subordinate to the OCU, but would directly report to the EP. In response to these events, the Moscow Patriarchate broke communion, in quotes, with the EP. This term, quote, breaking communion, end quote, is ambiguous and means multiple things. Initially, Moscow did what amounts to breaking diplomatic relations with the EP, removal of the ecumenical patriarch's name from the diptychs, a ban of con-celebration of MP clergy with EP clergy, and withdrawal from pan-Orthodox initiatives involving the EP. Very soon after this, though, as the situation continued to escalate, the MP took the bigger step of banning its faithful from partaking of communion in EP churches and from EP faithful from partaking of communion in MP churches. This more extreme break in communion is much less common historically, and from the MP's perspective at the time was largely aimed at making it clear to the UOC MP faithful in Ukraine that they should not under any circumstances attend the churches of the OCU. There seems to have been an expectation on the part of the EP and OCU leadership that many UOC MP bishops, clergy, and parishes would immediately switch over to the new church structure. In fact, this did not happen. Other than the two UOC MP bishops who participated in the Unification Council, no other bishops have joined the OCU. A small percentage of the UOC MP parishes switched. The exact number is disputed, as the UOC MP claims perhaps 200 losses, while the OCU claims that it received around 600 new parishes. The UOC MP alleged that some parishes were forcibly taken from it with government support. Now remember, this is alleged and this is 2022, but it's been proven since then, in the past couple of years, that this, actually is going on. With property deeds being changed without approval, despite a public call for by Metropolitan Epiphany to its followers not to seize churches, but to let people freely join the OCU. In any case, even taking a high estimate, the UOC MP lost relatively few parishes. It still has about 12,000 parishes, that's of 2022, compared to around 7,000 for the OCU. Honorary Patriarch Philaret soon became dissatisfied with the arrangement of the OCU, and he declared the revival of his Kiev Patriarchate jurisdiction. He brought some bishops with him and has since consecrated more bishops and has received Greek Old Calendarist hierarchs into his jurisdiction. Thus, today there are, once again, 3 jurisdictions in Ukraine, not counting the EP Exarchate. UOC MP, which remains the largest, OCU, and KP. In the months following the formation of the OCU, a few Orthodox churches in addition to the EP recognized it, the Patriarchate of Alexandria and the Church of Greece, as well as the Archbishop of Cyprus and some of his Holy Synod. Although the bishops of Cyprus and to some extent Greece remain divided regarding the OCU, for example, Metropolitan Neophytus, who's part of the bishops of Cyprus, the Synod there, he recognizes the UOC and Onufri as the canonical church and the canonical bishop. Some of the Orthodox churches, e.g. Serbia, Albania, the Czech lands, and Slovakia, Poland, have openly rejected the canonicity of the OCU. i.e., they take the position that Metropolitan Epiphany is not only not an autocephalous primate, but not a bishop. Of course, the MP has been the most outspoken in rejecting the OCU. Other churches have simply ignored it, including Antioch, Romania, Georgia, and Bulgaria. These churches have avoided any form of recognition of the OCU, including concelebration. In total, only 4 of the 14 universally recognized autocephalous churches have accepted the OCU, and these 4 are all Greek, quote-unquote, churches. Yeah, which would make sense because because the Patriarch, Constantinople, Greek, so it makes sense to me. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has created significant tensions between the UOC MP and the MP itself, and only time will tell where these may lead. Well, we know now, don't we? Lots of persecutions. Both Metropolitan Onufry and his Holy Synod have openly, and not by the MP, by the way, by the Ukrainian government and the schismatic, or whatever you want to call these other churches that are not really recognized as legitimate. Both Metropolitan Onufry and his Holy Synod have openly opposed the invasion, called on Putin by name, and begged Patriarch Kirill of Moscow to speak out against the war. Since the war began, some 18 dioceses of the UOC MP have reportedly ceased commemoration of the Patriarch Kirill, and this non-commemoration has spread to some MP churches in other countries. In the Slavic liturgical tradition, even at the parish level, the primate of the church is commemorated liturgically. The longer the war goes on, and in light of the continued statements by Patriarch Kirill justifying the invasion, it seems increasingly likely that the tension between the UOC MP and the MP will lead to further changes in the Ukrainian Orthodox landscape. But let's understand that because of what happened to the Russian speakers in Donbass being, civilians being bombed by the Ukrainian army, and it was going on for 8 years before the invasion, you have to take that into consideration of why Patriarch Kirill is justifying that. Now, but I will say, having said that, no bishop is to really be justifying a war, because that involves killing. So it's not in good grace to be saying, yeah, you justify whatever, the invasion or war, whatever. I'm just showing you these two different things going on, the NATO issue, encroachment, and all that. And then the Orthodox, the spiritual side of this. Okay. As noted at the outset, this is an extraordinarily complicated, controversial, emotionally charged subject, and this modest attempt at a summary is undoubtedly an oversimplification that glosses over many details. I welcome clarification for those who are familiar with this subject who are more familiar with this subject. I have one person I want to mention here that I thought was interesting. He had some historical context. He said, I would like to add some context in response to detractors of this article, as well as others who criticize the MP in general. Going back further in history, there is contention over the past status of the church and what is now Ukraine that plays into this. Ukrainian nationalists claim that Ukraine is actually the territory of the EP and that the connections with the Church of Moscow are new. This is not true. It results from an anecdotal examination of history. Moscow became a patriarchate in 1589 and Western Rus remained EP. Ukraine was only transferred as late in history as 1686, ergo Constantinople should be boss. From 988 until 1299, there was only one metropolitan in all of Rus. Then after that, it alternated. Sometimes there was one metropolitan, sometimes not. St. Peter of Moscow, who was from western Ukraine, even moved the metropolitan see of Kiev to Moscow at one point when that city was growing in power and free from Western influence. That's an important point, Western influence. This was while Kiev fell to the Lithuanians. Prior to the transfer of these Western Rus territories to the Moscow Patriarchate in 1686, what is now Ukraine shared a metropolitan with Moscow and the Great Russians for over half of their history. The chief reason why the Russian Orthodox Church, yes, under the EP at that time, had additional metropolitans added was because of the Lithuanian and Polish annexations of what is now Ukraine and Belarus. To be clear, the Lithuanians were pagans and the Poles Roman Catholic. That is why the split happened, and multiple metropolitans were assigned to places like Vilnius, Kiev, and Galich. Okay. Hopefully that made a lot of sense. Made sense to you, and you understand what was going on. The history, I know, is very complicated, but I think it was important to share that. So now that you understand and you've heard what the Patriarch Bartholomew is saying, where he's coming from on this, and where the other churches are coming from, you all make your own decision. I will say, having read over this, I think there's some key points. I can understand why the Ukrainian Orthodox parishes lay people would like their own patriarch of Ukraine, and that it's not attached to any other country. However, I think they tried that, as we saw in the article, and it just didn't succeed. There was just problems. And there's a part in there that said only 4 out of the 14 Orthodox churches recognize those other Orthodox churches. Most of them didn't. The majority didn't. And those 4 were the Greek ones that, are going to side with the EP anyway, right? That's the way I looked at it. So it tells me that the UOC, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, is the canonical and legitimate church, Orthodox Church in Ukraine, not the OCU. And of course, the other glaring proof that the OCU is not the canonical church is because of their behavior and actions of the clergy and the lay people within their church. You will know them by their fruits, and thus far their fruits have been rotten. Also, saints and elders have talked about the reunification of the Russian and Ukrainian churches after the Russian and Ukrainian war. So they've talked about that. There's also the new crew that Elder Ephraim has talked about in his prophetic words, as well as Metropolitan Neophytus echoing these words and from the saints. The new crew means legitimate bishops and clergy and all that will be the ones left standing, not the illegitimate ones when this war's over. They're also going to have another ecumenical council after that time too, when King John is ruling, and they're going to fix many things that have not been fixed. Obviously, there's things like I think they said even the calendar might be fixed, but the ethical issues that weren't around during the last ecumenical council will be addressed and dealt with and fixed, put in the council, and it's going to be fixed, for lack of a better word. Well, I hope this was informative and helpful to you. It certainly was for me. If you feel it was helpful, go ahead and share it. Maybe some other people don't know the total history of this. It's very hard. It's complex. It's kind of difficult to totally digest, I guess, in a certain extent, but not really when you start to get what was said. In any case, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for following my channel. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening, day, morning, a nice Friday, or maybe you're already into Saturday on some of the people who are going to see this video. And have a blessed day. Until next time.